It's your open source advocate and I'm back. I've got another really cool application that is actually going to be several applications that we have to do, so I'm actually going to go through this in a series because it's just way too much to fit into a single episode. Really the whole series is going to be about FreeIPA, so if you're not familiar with that, it's really the Linux and open source world's answer to Active Directory, which is a Windows and Microsoft product. One of the great things about Active Directory, and it's one of the things that keeps IT administrators in the Microsoft and Windows ecosystem, is the ability to create users and add hosts to the domain for that network for your company or your organization or your school or whatever it happens to be, and then to administer those things all from a single server or from a set of servers that act like a single server, and it's basically your domain controller. So it makes it really easy for the IT administrators to get in and add a new user and give them roles and permissions and make sure that that's all set up without actually having to go out and touch every machine in an area where that user might be working, or to touch that user's machine specifically over and over and over when you add new people or hire new people. So FreeIPA is kind of the answer to that. Now, if you ever see this out there in the Red Hat world, they call it identity management, so it's got a little bit different name, but don't sweat that. It could be capital I, little d, capital M, so IDM, but FreeIPA is exactly what identity management is and what it's based on anyways, but it is a Red Hat type thing. So in order to get into FreeIPA, you kind of have to get into the right kind of servers and software, and I run mostly Ubuntu on my host machines here, and I don't really want to set up any of my host machines for FreeIPA here at my home, but I do want to run through this and show you how to set this up. I kind of want to go through this from the perspective of somebody who messed up quite a few times before I really got this right and figured out what I was doing, so that you really understand what it is. And there's a lot of pieces to that. So the first thing I want to talk about is Virt-manager, or VMM, Virtual Machine Manager, just depends on what you've called it in the past. You can use VirtualBox for this, or you can use Virt-manager, you can use VMware if that's what you prefer to use. You can use whatever you want to do your virtual machines, but I'm going to do this in virtual machines. And really, if you were to set this up on an actual server at an actual company, you would probably set it up in some sort of virtual machine, KVM or Zen type virtual machine anyways, because you don't want to use up an entire server just for this if you don't need those kind of resources for this. There is a Docker option as well, so I will keep working on the Docker option. I have not gotten it to work for me yet, but I'll keep working on it and let you guys know what I had to do to make it work once I get that going. But first we're going to go through this more like a regular IT administrator might kind of approach it. And step one is really getting your virtual machines set up. So I do use VirtualBox a lot, so if you're a VirtualBox person, don't sweat it. It's kind of the similar setup. It just looks a little different. I just went with Virt-manager because it uses KVM and some things like that in the background that are a little bit faster. And there's other videos out there that can show you the difference between Virt-manager and KVM versus VirtualBox and what kind of speed you actually get from those things. I'm also doing this on a remote machine from what I'm logged in to here. So this is my server that I actually run all my Docker stuff on normally. That's the machine that I'm recording right now. And I haven't installed Virt-manager on it yet, so that's kind of what we're going to go through today is Virt-manager, and then I'm going to help you set up a couple of virtual machines on it so that you'll be ready to kind of start the FreeIPA stuff. So there will be a couple of things that I'll want you to go get. You don't have to get exactly what I get, but you should get pretty close to it, or else the instructions that I go through for FreeIPA may not work for you, and you may have to go do some digging to figure out why. So I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers and all of my patrons over at Patreon. Seriously, you guys make this so worth it for me to do these videos every week. I really truly enjoy it, and I just can't say thank you enough. If you're enjoying these videos, subscribe. Let YouTube know that I'm doing a good job by subscribing to the channel, plus you'll get notified when I have new videos coming out. And finally, if you're enjoying what I'm doing, give it a like, just click on that thumbs up, and that way YouTube knows that you like it, and they'll pass it along to other people that might enjoy my content as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you again. Let's get started. Let's just start off with Virt-manager. So we want to install Virt-manager, and that includes KVM and qemu-emulator and a few other things. So we're just going to go down here and open up our terminal, and I will make this just a little bit larger on the font size for you guys here so that's easier for you to read, hopefully. I'm sorry about the color of the terminal. Let's just see. Yeah, it's white with black text. You should be able to read that. So I'm going to paste in a command that is going to help us get all of this done, and I'm just going to leave it up on the screen for a second. I'll tell you what all we're installing here. So this is a Ubuntu based system. Ubuntu 18.04 is what I'm installing this on. And I'm going to use sudo apt, which is the package manager for Debian and Ubuntu based systems. Install, and then this is qemu-kvm, so we want kvm with qemulator attached to it. We need libvirt, the libvirt-daemon-system, so we're going to install that. So it's libvirt-daemon-system. And then we also are going to get libvirt-clients, so that's libvirt-clients. And then we're going to get bridge-utils, because this lets us make a bridge network inside of the virtual machine, which is something we need to do in order to get our FreeIPA stuff working. So just go ahead and install that one as well. And then finally, the actual queen of the show here, Virt-manager. So we're going to install all of these things, and then if you want to make this a little easier on yourself, just put a -y out there at the very end of this stuff, and it won't prompt you about, are you sure you want to install these things? Because that's why we're running this command. We want to install these things. So I'm going to hit enter. It's going to prompt me for my sudo password, and then it's going to do the install. And I won't make you sit through the entire install. I will fast forward through this part. Alright, it's done, and this machine's pretty good. Now, this little part here at the end, you most likely will not see this. This is just something super special for me on this machine, and I don't know why it does this, but I'm not worried about it, so you guys shouldn't worry about it either. You won't see this. You'll probably see this part right here about the init-rd image, depending on the version of the software, version of operating system you're installing this on. But really, it went through pretty quickly. It took about 30 seconds, not much more than that. So I'm going to clear out the terminal here. We've got everything installed now. I'm going to leave the terminal open here in the background, but now we're going to go and actually start up Virt-manager. Now this may give us a little warning the first time that we do it. Yeah, so it likes to give this little thing, unable to connect to the Virt-qemu system, verify that libvirt-daemon is running, so we'll close that. Usually what I do is I'll just in the terminal type in sudo virt-manager, and then it comes up without any problem, and you can see what's going on here because it's got sudo privileges now. Don't know why it does that or why it cares if I do it that way, but for some reason it does. So this is the Virt-manager or virtual machine manager. So if you've ever used VirtualBox, it's very similar. It's got a pretty nice little user interface, and you can kind of expand this out to see more stuff as you go along. But this is your local KVM install, so there's no images here yet or anything. And here you've got some regular just options. So you've got, you know, add a connection. So if you're going to SSH, which I will show you later because I actually have my running one on a different machine, so I'll do an SSH from the machine that I'm working from, and we'll run the stuff that way. But you can create a new virtual machine. Of course, you can close and you can quit. You can also edit connection details if you need to. You can delete things, and you can edit preferences, and then you can view different graphs. So you can pick what graphs you want to see as they become more available. So CPU usage, and then host CPU usage. So this is guest. So as you're starting up your guest machines, your images, you can see a little graph here of what they're doing. And then you can also see what's going on in your host machine so that you know what it's using up on the host machine, and you can kind of keep an eye on that, which is pretty nice. And then you have help and about. So if we go to preferences here, there's a few things here that you can set up. So you can enable the system tray icon, which would be kind of down here in the right or up in the upper right, or who knows where. It depends on your system where that's at. You can have polling so that every 3 seconds it's basically checking to get those percentage and things that you want. If you want to change that to be less rapid or more rapid, you can. 3 seconds seems to work pretty well so far from what I've seen, so I'm not too worried about that. With new virtual machines, there's a few things that you can set here as well. So there's some defaults that you can set. So for me, it's going to use Spice to do the actual connection and show me the graphical user interface if I want to do that. Allow Spice USB redirection, yes, and then storage format. I don't change this stuff. I haven't changed this yet, so if you know more about this stuff and you want to change it, feel free, but I don't. So the only other options that you have here are VNC, so defaults to Spice, and then you have Spice as an option, but VNC is the other one. I don't like VNC myself. I've always found it to be pretty laggy. and I just don't. Spice seems to work just fine. On the console, so full screen only. So again, resize the guest in window. So I do tend to turn this one on, and then grab keys, Control L and Alt L. So you can basically tell the guest machine to use those, not the host machine. If you want to lock your system, that kind of stuff, and you can change that. And then force console shortcuts. So I don't check that. I just leave it alone. And then you can give them feedback if you want to. So once I've set the one little parameter there that I change, which is the basically resize guest with window, I turn that on and I close it. And that's an entire virtual machine manager type setting. So the next thing is to be able to set up an actual virtual machine. So first, you want to have a couple of images that you're going to use. If you don't already have this set up, you need to go get some images that you want to pull down. So the ones that we want are Fedora 32, Workstation, and Ubuntu 2004 is what I'm going to use for this. You can use other versions if you want to. I just know that what I'm going to do works in those two for sure. Probably could use the Ubuntu 1804. You could probably use Fedora 31, 30, just so on. 33 is coming out soon. I have not tested that. It was still in beta when I started this stuff, so just be aware of that. But I'm going to use Fedora 32 and a Ubuntu system, and you'll kind of see what we're going to do there. So I've shown you how to install Virt-manager, and I'm going to switch over to the other machine that actually has the ISOs on it, but it's still going to be in Virt-manager, so you'll kind of see what that looks like, and we'll continue. Alright, I've switched over to my other machine, and you can see that it is different. This is the Ubuntu 2004 base installed on this machine, but I installed Virt-manager a few days back, and again, you can see I don't have any images set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new virtual machine. It's going to pop up and it's going to ask you what kind of machine do you want to do or how do you want to install this. And I'm going to use local install media because I downloaded the ISOs that I want. So initially this kind of threw me when I got to this screen because I didn't really understand what these boxes were for, and this was blank. So right now you can see that it's already got something selected, which is the Ubuntu desktop, but I want to do the Fedora one first anyway, so I'm going to say browse. So if you don't realize that you can go look around, the other thing is it starts up here and there's nothing, so then you think, oh, I'll click plus. It just threw me off. So the user interface is a little bit weird. So I'll go back down, you hit browse, you come here, just look for downloads basically, and it'll go to your downloads folder, and if you don't see this option, just hit the plus and you can select another folder from your directory structure. So when you do that, then it'll put it here, and then you can see different things that are in your downloads folder. So I'm going to pick the Fedora Workstation ISO. I'm going to highlight it and hit choose. And then here it should try to detect it, which it did. So it says Fedora. If it doesn't say Fedora here, you need to blank this out and start typing so that it will find it. And you may have to uncheck this box so that you can do that. But if you start typing, you'll see here that it says Fedora. Unknown in this case because they don't have a Fedora 32 option. So I'm just going to click it, but you can also just do automatically, and it'll check and it'll try to find it. But make sure it says pretty close to what it is that you're installing. If you don't, you get some weird things defaulted in that you have to go mess with. So this screen's done. We're going to move forward. So here you're going to set how much RAM you can give to this machine. Now I have 16 gigs on the base machine, so I'm going to give this one 4096, which is 4 gigs of RAM, and 2 CPUs is fine. So I'm going to move forward. Now you need to adjust based on the system you're running. You need to be able to give this thing about 4 gigs for FreeIPA. They do suggest 2 CPUs, so if you've got that capability, do it. If you don't have enough RAM, you don't want to give it all of the RAM in the system, obviously, because then the system can't run in the background. But try to give it as much as you can, and try to give it 2 CPUs. It'll probably run on 1 CPU, but it's going to be slower than what I'm doing. So next we're going to move forward once you've set that. And then here it wants to give it 20 gigs. I don't think we need 20 gigs. I'm just going to give it 15. I have a pretty small solid-state drive in this machine. If you've got the space and you don't care, give it what you want. I'm not going to be storing much on it except setting it up for FreeIPA, so 15 gigs ought to be plenty. Once you've set that, you're going to move forward one more time, and you're going to give it a name. So name this thing because that's what it's going to show up as over here. So I'm going to name this like Fedora-IPA-server because that's what it's going to show up as back here in the background. It just makes it easier for me to identify the machine, especially if you start getting a long list of virtual machines in here for any reason. As an IT administrator, you want to be able to identify those things pretty well. You might even give it like the actual name you intend to give it for its domain name, so we'll need that at some point. So if you're going to give it a fully qualified domain name, which you'll have to do to run FreeIPA, you could go ahead and give it that as well. So you could say IPA srv.my, and I'm going to use myhome.local. You can use whatever you want for your domain when it comes time to do this, but know that you have to either own the domain if it's a public domain, or you need to use a private domain. And if you're going to do that, I highly recommend just using .local here at the end. Just keeps it easy, and that way you're not using .net or .com where the thing's trying to go out to the internet and find it. So then this gives you kind of a rundown of what you've got set. And here you can say customize the configuration. We don't need this checkbox, but right here we need to click on this network selection. And we want to drop this down, and we want to pick the bridge. We want to say host device. So we want to bridge to our host device, and you want to look for your Ethernet. You may have wireless and Ethernet. I highly recommend if you can plug this machine in, the host machine, you plug it into your router, and then pick this one. If you're running off Wi-Fi only, then make sure you pick the Wi-Fi network connection. Pick whichever one actually gives you internet, but you want to use the bridge. You don't want to use this one that's just NAT. So I'm going to click on this one. You want this as a bridge. It's going to say bridge right here. Make sure it says bridge. There's other options in there. Make sure it says bridge. It's going to give you this warning. I've gotten this warning every time, and it's worked every time, so I wouldn't sweat it too much. And then you're going to click on finish. And this thing is going to go and start up, and you see right here it gives us already a view into the virtual machine that it's starting. So we can kind of resize this screen while it's sitting there waiting. It's going to do a little countdown, or else you can just hit the enter key on your keyboard to get it to move on. Then it's going to try to do a system check. Give it just a second and you'll see that start. If you don't want to wait for that, hit escape. It might be good to wait for it the first time you're using that ISO, just to make sure the ISO is good. I've already done this several times, so I know the ISO is good. And then it's going to go through the boot up process into Fedora. So I want you guys to go through this process with me to install two virtual machines. So one is going to be Fedora 32, and one for me is going to be Ubuntu 2004. You can use Ubuntu 1804, you can use Ubuntu Mate, you can use whatever you want. That part doesn't matter, but if you'll stick with me on these two machines, at least you'll get the basics of how to set these things up for FreeIPA when it comes time, and we'll be on the same page. So I'm going to continue through this. So once this comes up, it's a normal installer. If you've ever installed Linux, you should know kind of how to run through this, but Fedora, just click on this button and it's going to start up the installer. It just takes a second and it'll come up. So I'm installing, this is Ubuntu. I'm installing Fedora into a virtual machine, so I can just move this window around, okay, so you can kind of see, you know, what's going on. So remember those graphs I talked about? Here's the graphs. Oops, made that too big. So I can see what kind of stuff's going on, so I can see my host and I can see my guest. But I'm going to move this back to the middle because this is what you guys are interested in. There we go. It's a little bit bigger. I think that's too big. Let's put it back down so you can actually see what the heck we're doing here. So I'm going to use English and English US. That is what I speak. If you have a different language you prefer, go for it. So here it's going to detect your keyboard. It will try to detect your time zone, and for whatever reason Fedora never detects the right one for me. So I'm going to move it to Chicago, which is me. You should move it to your time zone wherever you live, and then hit done. And then right here, even though it has the installation media, you need to click on it. You'll see that it's already checked. It's okay. Just click it once, it'll uncheck it. Just click it again, it'll check it, and then click done. It's going to take a second. And then it'll come back and it'll first look like this, but then it's going to come up. There you go. See, it finds it, and then it gives you the button and it says start the installation. So now this is actually going to go through and install the software. I'm not going to make you sit through that. We'll come back here in just a minute when it says finish. Alright, when that finishes, just hit the finish button here. And that's going to go away. Now, some systems will reboot automatically. So like when we do Ubuntu, it's going to do that. So if it doesn't, just go here. Go to restart, go to power off, and just do restart. And the first time it comes up, it's going to run you through a little bit more of a startup wizard so that you can get your credentials and everything set up. Feel free to check or uncheck these as you want. I don't ever do any of that. And then here, your name. So my name is Brian. There's my username. Looks good. I'm not going to use this right now. I'm going to go back and check on this later. in another episode if everything works out the way I want. So here we're going to do password. You should really make a stronger password than I am, but make a password. And hit next, and then it'll tell you you're all done. And now it should ask you, it's going to tell you all about how to use GNOME. So if you want to read that, you can. I'm going to go here and I'm going to say log out. And I'm going to hit just that just to make sure that my password works and I can log in. Awesome. So we are set up as far as we need to be set up right now. So one thing I wanted to show you about Virtual Machine Manager, and one of the reasons I kind of like this over VirtualBox for this project, is I'm going to click on this little close window and you notice it continues to run. If you do that in VirtualBox, it's going to ask you, okay, do you want to power this thing down or do you just want to shut it off or what? It's not going to keep it running in the background, and I want this running in the background even if I'm not using it, because what happens when we install FreeIPA is it creates a web user interface that I can access from other places, and of course you're using it to actually authenticate with your other machines. So if this is off, it won't authenticate and it makes it really hard for you to log in suddenly. So there you go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use a Ubuntu, and in this case I'm going to use a 2004 image. You can use 1804 if you prefer, but I'm going to click on a new machine again. So I'm just going to keep going through the same process, and again, just keep it local. Here you're going to click on browse, make sure you go to your downloads that you picked earlier, pick the actual Ubuntu that you want, and I don't know why this says 6.1, but it should be an ISO. Oh no, that's VirtualBox. I want Ubuntu. What am I doing? So pick on Ubuntu or click Ubuntu and then choose. And once you've got that set, again, it should try to find it, and it did, Ubuntu 2004. As long as it finds it, great. If not, uncheck the box and just type in what you're doing. Move forward. It wants to give it 4 gigs. That's great. 2 CPUs. That's fine for me. Again, adjust this according to your capabilities for whatever machine you're using. And then 25 gigabytes is again a little bit high for a test machine, so I'm just going to give it 20. That's great. And I'm going to move forward. So here again, I'm just going to go ahead and give this the actual name that I want it to have. So I'm going to call it ipa01.myhome.local. Just double check your spelling, make sure you get the domain part right here, the same as what you did for your server. And then remember, down here we need to go down, we need to pick on the first, I'm going to use my wired Ethernet here. You can use Wi-Fi if that's all you have. And then make sure it says bridge and then hit finish. So I usually just hit enter at that first prompt. That should bring up Ubuntu and get it going. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. It comes up with a little bit larger screen. It wants to check the disk. I'm just going to hit escape so it'll quit trying to check the disk. Again, if that's the first time you've gotten that image, you might want to let it run through. So when it comes up, if you want to install Ubuntu, you can just double click on this little installer icon. Pick your language, pick your keyboard layout. You want normal installation, and then I always do install third-party updates. Erase disk and install Ubuntu is what we want. And then hit continue when you get the little pop-up. In this case, it found the right time zone, but if it doesn't, make sure you pick the right time zone. And then hit continue, and here type in your name and then what you want this machine to be called, which is ipa01.myhome.local, and then your username, and then create a password for it. Now, I don't click the login automatically in this case because I want to make sure that I have the option to log in with other credentials whenever I get to the logins to whenever I start the machine. So in an IT situation, you should really never click the login automatically. You should always make people log in. Hit continue once you've got everything entered. You should have little check marks all the way down. and then it's going to start doing the install. So again, I'm not going to make you watch the install. I'll come back when this part's done. Alright, so while this Ubuntu is finishing installing, I want to talk very quickly about a couple of the other things that I'm going to cover in this series. So first, I'm not going to just post this video and leave you for a week. I will post this series of videos over a few days. It'll be this one, and then a couple of days the next one, and a couple of days the next one. That gives everybody time to, one, find it, see it, and then not have to go digging around for it, hopefully. I'll create them as a playlist so you can start from one and run through them all. But it's going to take me a little while to record all of these because it does take time to go through this. And the reason I break it up is so that you can do one thing, or you can watch me do this thing, and then you can go spend the time to actually get it done as well. And then we'll go to the next part. If you've never installed FreeIPA, I highly recommend that you do what I'm doing and use virtual machines initially so you can really learn and understand what's going on. Don't try to do this on production machines that you have around your house or around your business or anything like that until you've done it a couple of times in a virtual setup, just so you don't screw something up and have to go, replace it with images and things like that, right? So we're going to do that. I know you're going to have questions, and I'll try to cover as much as I can on this, and I'm still learning, so I'm going to be covering things as I'm going along. But what if you don't have an all Linux shop? What if you have a group of Windows machines? What's the likelihood of that at a university? Extremely high. Why? Because Windows still has 95% market share in the world. What do you do if you have X, Y, or Z? I know there's a lot of what do you do ifs out there, and there'll be more than I can answer. I know you guys will have those questions, but I'm going to try to cover as much as I can as I go through this series with you. I think it'll be really great and really useful, and I'll also try to cover just some different web applications, and I don't want to cover it from the perspective that, hey, here's how you set up this web application to log in with LDAP and FreeIPA and all that stuff. I really want to try to cover it from, here's a few examples of how you set this up to use your single sign-on LDAP, and then that way I'm helping you build a framework of how you do it with each application, because the application setup may be slightly different, but the concepts and the things around that should be similar. And if I do a decent job and give you a good framework of how that should go together, my hope is that you could bring up any web application you find that supports LDAP authentication, and you'll be able to set that up so that people and your users, or you or your home or your family or whoever, can log into that web application using your LDAP. So if you're self-hosting a lot of stuff, you don't have to have 75 different logins for 75 different applications, or you're not using the same login all the time for all these different applications, but instead you're using an authentication system, which is what we're setting up. So that's where we're headed with this series. I wanted to get you into Virt-manager and show you what's going on with it. So I just wanted to kind of cover that with you guys now. So you can see this is finished. So if you've never done Ubuntu install before, you just hit reboot now, and it's going to shut the machine basically down, and it's going to tell you, hey, you need to take out the install media, which you don't have to do in this case, and then hit enter. So just hit enter and it's going to reboot. So it's going to come right back up, and then we can just test our login credentials real quick, just like we did on the Fedora system, and make sure that everything is up and running. And on Virt-manager, these things boot up pretty quick, at least on my machines that I've got this running on, which is great, so it doesn't take too long. And I yammer enough that you guys can listen to me talk all the way through the reboot. Look at that. So I'm getting logged in. It should come up with my desktop, which is great, and I've got my local user account here. So, oh yeah, system problems, that's always great. Yeah, report it, why not? We're going to skip that. I'm going to just move through this. I don't really make any changes on these things. I do allow it to send that. And I'm ready to go, and it wants to go find applications. That's great. And we're done. So step one is pretty much finished. Feel free to leave this running and jump around and test it. So one of the cool things about Virt-manager, I mean, look at this, is pretty fast. This is pretty close to like what I have live. So you can kind of see that there's a reason why this is kind of preferred for a lot of people. And again, the ability to just close this window and have it still running in the background is great. And the last thing I want to cover on Virt-manager is the ability to log into this thing remotely. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to leave it running, and you'll see that there's two things here on this local machine. So I'm just going to leave that thing running, and I'm going to close out my remote session there. and I'm just going to kill that. Okay, so I'm going to open up Virt-manager here on my local machine now, and you should be able to see this just fine. And basically what I've done is I've gone in here and I said add a connection. And in here it says this, you have this option here, but then you have this little checkbox that says connect to a remote host. So we're just going to check that box. And then in this case, my username is not root, it is Brian. And the host name is the IP address of the machine where you are running the main install of your Virt-manager. So in my case, it's 192.168.7.250. And then you're going to see basically this option of auto connect. I don't check that because I don't want it to auto connect. I want to click on this little icon back here to make it connect. Once you've got these things typed in, you hit connect and it's going to prompt you for your password. If you don't want to have to use a password, it's better to create SSH keys and then send those over to that machine from whatever machine you might be accessing this from. But you can use password authentication if you need to. So I've already done this, and really it is. You hit connect, it's going to ask you for your password, and then if it passes, if the password's correct, you're going to see this show up back here. If you have keys, the same thing, it's going to show up back here. So I'm going to cancel out of that, but you can hit connect, and then you'll see that you have your main local one, just like we had before, but then you have this second one. Now yours will probably just log in automatically that time because you hit connect, but I'm just going to tell it, I'm just going to double click it, and it's going to connect over there using SSH, and here you can see the two machines that I've got. So while it was installing the Ubuntu, I went ahead and shut down the Fedora, so it's not running. But the Ubuntu you can see is here running. So I can highlight this, and from here I can tell it, you know, if it's not running, I can tell it start up that virtual machine. So you hit the play button, you'll see it kind of, the graph will start to go up, and that's because it's starting the virtual machine. And then you can pause that, you can shut that down from here, so you've got different options of what you want to do from here on the control panel. But you can also open up your remote desktop session to see what's going on. So if I click on the Ubuntu one and I hit open, it's going to open that up, and I can just make this a little bit bigger for you guys here. And you can see again that it says report problem. That's fine. I don't know what happened with my install, but it says authentication required to report the problem. Great. Report it, send it to them. Maybe they need to fix something. Send. Sounds good. So I've got updates that I need to install on my Ubuntu system that I have on that virtual machine, which it should because it's 6-8 months old, and I just installed it. So I've got the same thing here where I just started up the Fedora system, and I'll click on open, and we'll be taken to the Fedora screen where we can log in. And now this one is a little bit laggy. Fedora is always a little bit laggy over this connection, and I don't know why. But Ubuntu is always pretty snappy. Now I'm on my wireless connection on the machine that I'm on currently, and so that's one of the issues. If I just plugged into my network cable, it would probably go quite a bit faster, but it's across the room and I didn't want to stretch out a network cable. So I am logged in through Wi-Fi, but my point is now I'm logging in through a remote machine and I'm accessing these machines remotely, which is pretty great. So when I'm done, I don't have to shut them down. I can just close the window. And then I can say, you know, I want to see that one again. And I can go down here and just bring it up. And I can say, okay, I'm done with this for now. And then when I'm ready to shut those down for now, I can. So I can just go here and I can say shut down. And it's going to shut down this machine. And you'll see this little line just end because basically it has shut off. So here in a few seconds when it pulls a couple more times, you'll see that the little graph is ending because the machine is now shut off. So it's pretty great control over these machines, and I can do the same thing with the Fedora machine. Didn't mean to click that. Shut down. There we go. So you can just shut them down. If they ever lock up where you can't get into them, you do kind of have that other option. So this disables because now the machines are shut down for now, but you do have some other options that you can take care of those things as well. So that's pretty cool about Virt-manager and Virtual Machine Manager. So if you're trying to virtually take care of a lot of virtual machines, this is a really cool tool. It's free, it's open source, so that's great. Everything that it runs is open source and free, which is also great. So this is a good one to get it started with. So if you don't have it, go get it installed, get a couple of get a Fedora and a Ubuntu image installed, and then come back for the next part in the series, and we will continue with FreeIPA. I hope you got a lot out of this episode. If you did, like, subscribe, tell your friends about it so they can come along on the journey with us, and I'll talk to you next time.